Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome. Thanks to Kevin for a terrific clinic on track building. But we're now going to be treated to a rail fanning feast from our own potato farmer from Idaho, who is actually a product of Cincinnati and who thinks that abroad means anywhere outside of Cincinnati city limits. So instead of a staple diet of Norfolk Southern and CSX trains, we're going to see CSX and NS locomotives abroad in Kentucky, maybe some KCS and Tennessee and Illinois. And of course, he had to drive home again. So we even had more pictures from different parts of Ohio. He blames Brad for calling it Travels Abroad because none of the pictures are from Australia. Brad can be forgiven for calling it abroad because Cincinnati is abroad from Australia. It's abroad from where I am too. Just again illustrating the worldwide nature of the NMRA. So, from his potato farm in Idaho or Ohio or wherever it is his spiritual home is, over to Jordan Spud Kramer.
How's everybody doing tonight? It's great to be back. And yes, it is correct that we are looking at rail fanning pictures again. Um, we are looking at it from also including not just Norfolk Southern and CXX. We're looking at UP and basically travels that are outside of the Cincinnati area, travels that were trips to, like, say, Chattanooga, Tennessee, or Rochelle, Illinois for the rail park. Um, and so we're starting off, and this was actually taken in Hamilton. It was a CXX southbound manifest, but it shows that we get up at the for crack of dawn to go out. And on this trip, we ended up in Elkhart, Indiana on this occasion, and it was about a 12-hour day. And starting heading northward on this trip, we had gotten to points. We had gotten up there, and this was at Eaton, Ohio, and this was NS 375 coming south. Um, notice the puddles. Notice how it's been raining. What we would later learn is that our trip to Elkhart, Indiana, was cut very short due to more rain. But he was followed in quick succession by NS 179 coming down from Bellevue, Ohio, going over through Fort Wayne, Indiana, with a ST-70 Ace leading and a Dash 9 trailing. But the biggest reasons I included these was the puddle. You got a still reflection. Now we're going to really truly start our trip abroad out in Indiana. This is out at a place called Campbellstown. Um, Walnut Level, Indiana. And this was taken right at sunrise. That's why I was shooting into the sun, and that's why it is so overexposed in the background. But again, this is one of those locomotives you can't shoot on Norfolk Southern anymore because it's an SD60M, former Conrail unit, and they're gone, long gone by now. And Hartford City, Indiana. This was NS 369 Elkhart, Indiana, via Fort Wayne to Muncie, Indiana. It would come down there, terminate, and that would provide all the traffic for the locals that operate out of Muncie. And the reason for that trip was the Rio Grande Heritage Unit, which is on the left-hand side. It was up there on a grain train, and we could not get to the location to get a better shot of it. We later did after a 2.5-hour wait, but at this point, they were still building this grain train. Greatest story about this was everybody and their family was out chasing this. We was out here photographing it. It was a clear 60-degree November day, and word had gotten out that this unit had been sent south out of Fort Wayne, Indiana, with with 2 other NS units to pick up a grain train at Montpelier, Indiana. And then it sounded like they had sent the power back north as I was driving north with Ryan, my best friend who goes out on these adventures. And confusion ensued along with a couple of phone calls, and it turned out no, that the locomotive was still doing switching, but had disappeared off the track circuit in a TCS chart. Well, we get up there, and NS is running trains like normal. But this train coming south was a ethanol train off the BNSF. And it's another one of those ST60Ms. Another reason I've included this shot is that nowadays this area is completely refigured, and West Montpelier is no longer West Montpelier. It is now Blackstone, I believe is what they've called it. And the siding has been extended 7,000 feet northwards. And the track that the Union Pacific Rio Grande Heritage Unit is sitting on is now another part of the passing siding. Other thing to notice is that the crew member getting ready to do the roll by of the ethanol train in the bottom left-hand side of the photo. And we're now heading south in Ohio. We're about 78 miles from Cincinnati at this point on the Indiana, Ohio, with a CXX grain train that is, well, with a CXX run-through power grain train that is headed back to the CXX at Columbus from Washington Courthouse. This line is the former Baltimore, Ohio, Newark, Ohio to Cincinnati, Maine, and nowadays sees only a couple of trains a day, if that. But the CXX motive power kind of made it interesting to photograph when CXX has not owned this line since 2005. And we're in Columbus, Ohio on a different day. This is up at a place called Cook Road. And we had went up there for a train show. This was in March or April, I believe, and I remember it being very cold out that day. But notice the locomotive behind it. It's an SD70M in the BNSF, in the BN executive paint, as they called it. I actually don't have a symbol for this one, but if you look at it, you have the double track main is the Norfolk Southern, Columbus, well, technically Portsmouth, Ohio to Sandusky main line, very heavy coal artery route. And on the right side of on the next set of track over, which is the single track main line, that is the CXX's Gallipolitan to Columbus line, which is what CXX calls the Burt line. Also, another big thing to notice is the code line. Code line still here and in use, whereas it's gone in many other places in the United States. And we're in Indiana again, jumping around a bit on this one. Biggest reason I included this was to show that while a lot of people say Indiana is flat, they're not lying. It is pretty flat. This was a CXX Hotshot Intermodal. In fact, I believe this was Q009 or 8, which at the time this was taken was basically UPS traffic from St. Louis heading to New York. And we're back in southern Ohio again on this one. Another drone photo of a NS coal train heading northward on that line that we were seeing previously, the Portsmouth to Sandusky main line. And notice how the right-hand track is heavier, is more weathered than the left-hand track. Reason that is that that track on the right is that this train's rolling down a grade. So the track on the right is for everything going south and stuff that would be climbing the grade. And continuing our look at the what they call the Columbus subdivision, I believe. We're in a little town called Omega, Ohio. And this is NS 176, I believe, is what he was calling himself that day. Running north out of Portsmouth, heading towards Cincinnati, heading towards Columbus, and eventually Bellevue. And notice the signal. So signals saying that signal's meaning that there's a next signal will be stop. Well, there's a problem with that signal, and a maintainer showed up later because right at the end of that signal is where it goes to single track. And we're in Chillicothe, Ohio, with another NS coal train heading south and heading back to the coal fields of West Virginia. Notice how the right hand side, it seems like there was a track at one point. That's because at this side area on the former Norfolk and Western Main Line, there used to be what they would do is put center sidings in, so that if a train was needing to, if they were going to build a train or a train needed to be stored, they had an area where they could park the train for holding till Columbus was ready for it, holding it till they got a crew for it. Well, that's how the NNW did it, and they started removing a bunch of stuff, and this siding was actually one of the sidings that got removed. But they shrunk the main line down. But further up on this photo, and you'll see it here in a minute, in this photo, you can see how the gap's still there, but they're starting to narrow it back down. And this is NS 189, which now exists, but it exists over on our side in Cincinnati that runs Detroit, Michigan to Cincinnati, Ohio. And we got another coal train on another day. This is just south of Chillicothe on 3 Locks Road. And this is a great story because if you go there, you're going to go, well, how did he get this photo? There's no way. I was standing on top of a car when I took this. And as you can see, at one point, this was double track all the way, but when they put CTC in and that, the Norfolk and Western decided to remove the second main line. This is a SD70M-2, and I believe behind it is a -9. The SD70M-2 is now gone off the roster. But the other thing to notice is look at the vegetation, how close it is to the railroad right away. Not much has been done to maintain a perfect right of way, as it's seen in some of our other photos we'll see. And we're in Portsmouth, Ohio. The building to the left of the locomotive was actually a meat processing facility. And from what I've been told, is actually might have been the inspiration for, I believe it's a Walther's kit. This is a empty coal train heading back into the coal fields at West Virginia, taken in about 2015, 2016, when you had this era of you could go trackside and see any railroad located. He is heading into the yard at Portsmouth to change crews and then continue south. And right on his heels was this NS Intermodal with another former Conrail SD60M leading. I believe this number on this guy was 225, which was Chicago, Illinois to Norfolk, Virginia. And as we were coming into Portsmouth that morning, we came across the counterpart to that train we just saw, which was NS 224. This had a BNSF unit on it. The BNSF unit is an ES44AC, and he's on the single track main just north of Portsmouth, where it narrows back up to run for a bit before it goes back to double track for a bit. And he was hauling. I would say he's doing every bit of track speed at this point. And one of the earlier shots later in that day was this NS freight train. I want to say it was NS 177, which was a at the time I want to say not NS 177. I want to say this was NS 188 actually. Looking at this photo now, but this was a NS from Roanoke that would work Portsmouth, Bluefield, all the way up the NW to Bellevue, Ohio. We had seen him work in the yard at Portsmouth and sat there waiting for him to go north. And finally, when he did, it was in perfect light. Notice the BNSF unit fourth in consist, and notice how nice and wide this right of way is, how nice and clean it is. If you're ever in the Portsmouth area and you're going to Columbus, you could take, I want to say it's Highway 22, and it basically parallels the NS main line from Portsmouth all the way up to Waverly, Ohio. And we chased it north. This is a favorite shot of mine as I am standing on what would have been main number 2 back in the day, and you can just see how rural southern Ohio is. And another shot. We chased him and noticed the burn marks on the UP unit. Also notice that there's no flag on this unit, like so many Union Pacific units have. It also shows the ruralness as the red barn, the classic red barn. And on another trip, we're over on the CXX's line from Columbus to Russell, Kentucky, the former C&O line. And if you notice, the tracks are getting wider. And what this is this was a start of another center siding. C&O and the N&W really liked these center sidings for storing cars, putting coal trains together, and doing this. The unit in front is a brand new, pretty much rebuild, pretty fresh out of the box rebuild of a AC 6000 that CXX has been doing recently. Again, another one of these lines that there's not a lot of traffic on anymore due to coal traffic going away, but you can still catch some interesting stuff on this line. The other thing to notice is that both the NS and CXX use what they call the Scioto River Valley to get fast running along it. It's a low grade, low profile, so why not have a fast running double track mainline to keep the coal trains moving? And we're in Waterloo, Indiana, as a very, very late Amtrak pulled in, as a very late Capital Limited pulled in for its station stop as a NS intermodal rushes eastward. Very late was due to the fact that it was probably held up at Cleveland or one of them due to NS or CXX. As much as they try not to interfere with it, with the amount of traffic that goes through on the the NS from Toledo to Chicago, it's inevitable that Amtrak will get somewhat delayed. On this day, we had gone up there because back in, I want to say it was 2017, when the Union Pacific 1943, which was still brand new at the time, had made a trip over to the eastern part of the United States for a special trip it did, involving Harriman Bank, I think is who it was. They had brought it, they were going to bring it east. Well, the train moved a lot quicker than everybody thought, it being an empty and all that. and we never got caught it. But NS provided some consolation prizes with a fleet of eastbounds, and we were also in the thing of heavy rains, and it being morning, you got some very dramatic shots. And this is these are out of order, unfortunately, but this is another NS east westbound heading towards Elkhart, Indiana, and maybe going to the yard there. But it's another one of those SD60 M-2s, and looking back, I never thought I had photographed these locomotives that much. It turns out I've gotten quite a few shots. All gone from NS's roster, unfortunately, but this area, this area from Elkhart, Indiana to Waterloo, Indiana, I would say is very. If you're a rail fan in the um, Northeast or the eastern part of the United States, getting out there to the Norfolk Southern Chicago line that was formerly the Conrail Chicago line that Dave Avelee's models is a sight to behold, because it is absolutely, especially in Indiana and Ohio, a racetrack. And another one of those storms, this time it was a westbound gracing our presence, and an eastbound gracing our presence, trying to outrun the rain. And this is how NS's intermodals were on this part of the railroad. It's flat, so hook up one unit and let them roll till they have to go over the mountains at Cleveland. The locomotive in photo is a SD70 ACE, and it's actually one of the later ones that were built after the heritage units. And we got another westbound out in this one. That's an SD70. And what's interesting about it is that on this particular trip, on this particular run, the lead locomotive, which was the NS unit third out, so right by where the sign is, it had died. Its cab signal equipment died, and they had gotten a local drafted in to run the power to run the train to Elkhart so they could get it there. Because on this section of railroading, there's cab signals. Well, there's cab signaling on this, I believe, on this portion of the railroad. And the Union Pacific unit, which was behind the NS fifth out, could not lead. And another one of these units that had another one of these trains at Waterloo. Unfortunately, I don't have the symbol for it, but this was right after a rainstorm occurred and right before another one had started, about 5 to 10 minutes later. And just the lighting was absolutely brilliant. But notice the details on the cab. Notice that the numbers on the number boards have been etched away, basically. And on the ENS Chicago line, they like running everything eastbound, which this guy is, on the right-hand track, and everything west, which is main 2, and everything westbound on main 1. Now, they do have the flexibility of, if they need to, they can route traffic around and stuff, but mainly that's how it is. And we jump down to LaGrange, Kentucky, on very famous in the rail fanning world as being a street running, very surviving street running section. Also famous because a virtual rail fan has a webcam there. This CXX manifest freight originated out of Queens Gate Yard here in Cincinnati and was treading its way lightly through the city of LaGrange as a festival was going on. What was funny this morning was there was a band playing, or at least trying to, because CXX had other options, because they had 3 other trains they were going to bring down through here in this time span. And here's another one of them. The band, whenever the gates would start going down, would stop playing, and they would say, "Well, here's another train. This is another this is another CXX inner auto rack train running down," and I believe this is what CXX called the auto sweeper, which means it would start up in Detroit and drop off auto racks, pick up auto racks, all the way down to Nashville, Tennessee. This is pre-precision railroading, scheduled railroading, and I do not remember if this train is still running or not. The other cool thing to look is on the far left-hand side of the photo, there is a person taking a photo of the train, as it is something that most people don't see. And the other thing is on the front side of on the conductor's side of the locomotive, notice the hand is getting ready to wave. They were getting ready to wave, and I did not time it properly. And now we're down on the famous Cincinnati, New Orleans, and Texas Pacific, better known as the Rat Hole. Another railroad, if you want great scenery, lots of train action, almost to the point where you can pull up to a spot and sit. This line is another line, like the line that goes through Waterloo, Indiana, that you can do this. It's a favorite of mine. I've grown up with this line, and this is in Burnside, Kentucky. And it was a maintenance away train that was tied down for the weekend, and the crew had left the light on. First locomotive's a -9 in the original NS paint scheme. They put the reflective stripe on. They hadn't done the white seal yet, but they did dashes. Second unit is a SD60E. SD60Es were used in mainline service up until a few years ago when they were demoted to yard service once NS started selling off every 4-axle locomotive they could find. And this is a photo that I actually had to go and ask Ryan about, because he went down with me on this trip and we could not figure out where this was for the life of us. We finally figured it out, and it's in a little town called Mount Morgan, Kentucky. And I mean, it's so little that you can, when you're there, it doesn't even register on the map, and they don't even have signs up. Now, this NS train is starting to climb back up the hills again, and he is running on track number 2 on this occasion. He's a southbound. He's come down from either Cincinnati or Louisville. Got onto the Cincinnati, New Orleans, and Texas Pacific at Danville, or just getting down south on straight, and he is making his way down to Oneida, Tennessee, Oakdale, Tennessee, and Harriman Junction, Tennessee, where he can either make a right-hand turn for Asheville, North Carolina, or he can make that's a left-hand turn, or he can and if he makes the right-hand turn, he heads down to Chattanooga, Tennessee. Interesting fact about the Cincinnati, New Orleans, and Texas Pacific is that it is actually owned by the city of Cincinnati and leased to the Norfolk Southern. It is the only city-owned railroad in the world that it goes across state lines. And the action was hot and heavy on this one. We're down in Burnside, Kentucky on a fire access road. So down here you're in the Daniel Boone National Forest, and this was NS 170 on this morning. And Daniel Boone National Forest is, as you imagine, a big forest, and it's a state park. Well, on these, how to get into the fire roads is they've built roads along the railroads, but they've also built all these interwinding connecting roads and trails that you can take your vehicles up, get down to the railroad where it crosses over, and get some really good vantage points. So this is what we did. We're down at a place called KD Tower. Well, it's now called KD, but back in the day it was KD Tower. And what it meant was, when the Southern Railway had towers and that and block operators back in the 1900s. They started on the Cincinnati, New Orleans, and Texas Pacific with the letters AA in Ludlow, and ZZ was in um, Chattanooga. So KD was halfway down between Cincinnati, well, between Danville and Oakdale, Tennessee. So they did alphabet. This was an NS 174 on this one. And there's an interesting story with this one because the crew had dimmed the lights. I knew there was something coming south on track number 2. But what I did not imagine was what this was. And that was a snake. Now, people who are familiar with Kentucky know that there's snakes down there, and there's a snake called the copperhead. Unbeknownst to me, I had been standing on top of it because I had walked into this location. I had been standing on top of it, and it had started to wrap itself around my foot before I realized it. Now, like any true rail fan, I made sure train wasn't coming, and then I had kicked it right about the time that the train came into view around the curve. And let me tell you this, I do not like snakes. I went into full adrenaline mode, and after I got this photo of this, and this was the only photo I got, unfortunately, I hightailed it back out of there. But again, you can also see the fire access road and what NS uses as maintenance away road. And also ATVers use as roads to get in and out of the little trails. And this is a photo of a thing of why you keep a scanner on you and you keep it turned up, because as I was walking back out from where I had taken that previous photo, here came an NS intermodal running at track speed, and I had not heard him. He was drifting downhill towards Burnside and running at track speed and was quiet. I believe this is NS 25A or NS 229, 228. It's the northbound version of NS 229. And from our starting photo, we now have the photo of the train that was in the background. This is at Cumberland Falls, Kentucky. And interesting thing about this is I'm standing where the former line, because the former line came back in before they did all their line relocations back in the 60s. Well, back when they built the C&O and TP, there were all these tunnels that were there. I want to say it was like something like 27 tunnels. And crews absolutely hated it. It was a nightmare in the steam era. My great-great-grandfather was a locomotive engineer on the Southern Railway. Well, in the 60s, the Southern Railway was approached by the state of Kentucky and the government and the Tennessee Valley Authority because they were going to create a lake called Lake Cumberland. And they were going to dam the lake and redo the right-of-way. Well, with government money and for this, Southern Railway went in and started relocating the trackage to give it gentler grades, less tunnels. In fact, no tunnels except for 2, number 20 and number 21 in Nemo, Tennessee. And the way they did this is because they started at the top of the mountain and literally carved straight down till they hit the desired roadbed. This train was a very short-lived train at the start of the PSR campaign for NS. And this was NS 144, which is odd because it's a southbound. NS 144 was Danville, Kentucky to Chattanooga, Tennessee. Locomotive that is leading is a NS-8, former Conrail unit. The way you can tell is by the number boards on this locomotive. Again, another photo you cannot take. And we're now at Chattanooga, Tennessee, on the line that goes from Chattanooga, Tennessee to Atlanta, Georgia. This is a northbound mixed freight rolling in to either go to Chattanooga's Butts Yard or to make the swing and head north towards Cincinnati, more likely heading into the yard at Chattanooga. Again, another one of those Dash 8s. But behind it is one of the first of the rebuilds. It's a one of the first not ES44s, AC to DC conversion units that NS has been building from their Dash 9s. And on this trip, the reason we were down there was for something called Railfest, and there's a joke in my family that I can make a trip from Cincinnati to Chattanooga, which typically takes 6 hours, turn into a 8-hour trip. And that's because I take the back roads and follow the C&O and TP down. And this was a photo from the chase me and Ryan were taking of a Norfolk Southern locomotive, and this is at Rosemary, Tennessee. This was a Norfolk Southern train 175 with Kansas City Southern power. And this was the end of our chase because the next photo location we came up to, the cab door was opened and the note had been very nicely passed, and by nicely I mean shouted at us to please stop following them, which we obliged. Because you always keep the railroaders happy in their books. And this is at Harriman Junction, Tennessee. I am standing on a public road, and the way I got there was over a 12-track public road crossing of Harriman Yard in Harriman, Tennessee. These 3 trains, the one on the left is a coal train that will be heading back to the coal fields of Indiana. Yes, Indiana has coal fields. It has the same sulfur content as the Powder River Basin, from what I've been told. The middle track was a NS Manifest waiting to go north for a crew. And the south track with the BNSF unit was a NS coal train waiting to go to Indiana as well. And the biggest reason for the show, going down to the Tennessee Valley Railway Museum, you have these 2 steam locomotives. First one is number Southern 630, a 1905 Alco Richmond 280, and the other one is the world famous 4501, Southern 4501, which is the first Southern 282, built in 1911, and it is an MS1. And during this trip, they were doing double-headed steam. They were doing a night photo shoot, which is what these next photos are. And I found out very quickly that I was using a outdated camera, unfortunately. And also, I had no idea what I was doing. This was my first night photo shoot. That is why it's blurry. But they are doing this. Do we have any questions, Andy? Well, we look at some of this next photo, which is basically the where they flip the power.
Well, we've got 1 or 2 questions.
Yes.
Firstly, have you seen the new potato hopper cars that can self-peel when unloading the spud load?
I have actually. I've actually seen the prototype over here at the test track in Colorado. They invited me down personally. And I will say this, they're very wonderful, and they're going to save a lot of time, and they'll help me save my problem of having to peel potatoes by hand before I sell them.
Oh, jolly good. Do you know these trains you take photos of are coming ahead of time? And if so, how? I mean, do you use a scanner, or do you know the times? Or...
I do use a scanner. And they say railroads don't operate on a schedule. but they kind of do. But it's this train should be at this yard by this time and this time. Does it happen typically? No. Um, but you get scanners is how I use most of my stuff. But even then, I've still had stuff where I'm pulling down to a grade crossing, getting ready to set up for this photo, and all of a sudden, here comes a train out of nowhere, and they're not calling signals. All they're doing is just hitting the button and creating a static noise, a static bleep on. And so to continue with the photo stories, this next one is a GP30, a Southern Railway GP30 leading the train. And the Southern Railway GP30 is from Tennessee, is from the Spencer, North Carolina Transportation Museum, but is leased to the Tennessee Valley Railway Museum. And they decided to do a caboose night photo shoot. And the really cool thing about this was the way they did this was Casey Thompson, former photographer for the Tennessee for Norfolk Southern, was using a flashlight and painting the scene, and this was at a very low ISO of I want to say 20 or 10. And we're in Chicagoland at a place called Lombard. Now, Lombard might sound familiar to some of you guys. There's a place called Lombard Hobbies. It's a hobby shop. I cannot give more recommendation to go to if you're into model trains. It is a place to check out, along with Displains Hobbies. And this was a outbound, I believe, commuter train.
Well, the next question is, glad to see the sign behind you has been put back up after the last clinic. What fixings did you use, or is it just blue tack again?
There's screws holding the sign up.
Oh,
I fixed it properly this time. And this was a trip out to the AML. This was our first trip out to the AML barbecue, a Modeler's Life barbecue that was held out in Rochelle, Illinois. I want to say this was the 2017 trip. And again, it's another one of these. You go out there and you've read the stories of Rochelle. You've seen the videos. You've seen the pictures of how heavy the traffic is. And then you get out there and your mind's blown from how heavy the traffic is. And this was a coal train heading towards Chicago and onto the NS. And the thing is that if you look, you notice that the coal train's sloping downhill. That's because you're at the top of a grade here.
Yeah. If you can pick one location which is your favorite to photograph, where would that be?
Honestly, this is going to come as a shock, but not Elkhart. 7 Mile, Ohio. I've shot more photographs there than I have anywhere else. It's just one of those scenic locations I like.
So you can remember where exactly you were when all these photos were taken?
Somewhat. I know the general area. Like this is out by Lincoln, Illinois, which is a very small town, and I believe they don't even have a postcode. I believe it's looped in with Rochelle.
So you don't keep notes of each shot you take?
These are older shots back when I didn't do that. And the other thing is that I can't find my notes. Because I used to be able to remember them, and then I blame myself getting shocked by a dryer that I've lost memory. But
all right. Another question. Two questions here. I'll put the two questions together. Which was the photo nearest to where the guy in Kentucky came after you with a shotgun? And the second question was, have you ever been in trouble with the railroad police, and how much was the bail to get you out?
So the first one we'll do the first one. That was down in that was the one of the NS Intermodal train that had snuck up on me. That was actually one that I was not expecting, and that story was I'm turned around. Ryan's kind of just sitting in the car on the other side of the tracks, like, I don't know him. I don't know who he is. And we get to talking, and I go, yeah, I'm here photographing trains. He goes, oh, he goes, well, I'm a hunt. He goes, you might want to wear something a little bit more visible than green. And I said, why? He goes, because it's starting to become hunting season, and we need to be very capable of seeing you. Railroad police, I've had varying. I've not had many encounters because I've known several railroad police officers, and I've never been arrested with that.
Oh, that's good. On the night photo on the bridge,
Yes.
what kind of bridge was it that used to be on the abutments? And the
Uh,
questioner generously says, it's okay if you do not know, but I think
wait.
you ought to know.
The stone abutments was the original bridge.
Yeah,
It was
right.
the original bridge that the Union Army destroyed when they were invading Chattanooga for the
Wow.
Battle of Chattanooga. Um, the other bridges there were, it used to be a double track main line until you got out to Missionary Ridge Tunnel, and they used to, it used to be double track, and it went to a gauntlet track through the tunnel, then back to double track. But they removed the one track, and the TVRM's got that, but it's always been that type of bridge. But the original bridge there was a wooden trestle bridge that got burned during the Battle of Chattanooga.
Yeah. And I think Ken Pryor's asking, have you got any pointers to make nighttime photography better?
So I'm working on a clinic for that. The first thing I can say is um, find a parking. So I do nighttime photography now, but I do it in a place called Hamilton, Ohio, where there is LED lighting. The second thing I can give is I actually picked this up from somebody from a clinic when they asked if I had a tripod. And I had one, but it had broken on me, but I went out and got another one. Get a tripod. Tripods are absolutely essential for doing nighttime photography because you will shake too much.
Yeah. It appeared on one of the bridge photos that you used flash.
They were
Is
using flash on that, and so Casey Thompson is Norfolk Southern's official photographer. He had rigged up that entire valley and had actually went across to the other side of that creek and had lined the entire area with flashes to do flash photography.
mm, is it not hazardous to use flash on a train coming towards you in case
So that was a staged
upset the vision
photography.
of the engineer?
That was a staged photo. Those
Right.
nighttime photography was staged. They were doing it for the anniversary of TVRM, and I cannot remember which anniversary it was. Or it might have been the anniversary of 4501.
Yeah.
But that's what that was. That's why I also say when you're doing night photography, do it with LED lighting in a parking lot where you can get it, because you can do that. Or make sure your lights are running 90 degrees to the railroad tracks. That way you're not blinding the crew. And if you do decide to use flash, fire off a couple of flashes so you can tell them.
Yeah.
And the other thing I've done, because I've done some flash photography before my flashes were destroyed, and that's another long story that could go into. But the flashes were destroyed. We did a scene in Camden, Ohio, with a crew coming around, and I actually had went up to the crew at the siding beforehand because they were sitting in the siding, and told them what I was doing, so they had pre-warning. Now, most rail fans don't have that luxury.
Okay, well, one final question. And that is, do you think the Golden Russet or the King Edward makes a better spud to mash?
King Edward.
Right, thank you. Well, thank you for that. And we're now back over to the international studios in Australia.
It's always my pleasure.
Well, you caught me unawares then.
This is Bob from the Bob Zenscale Man Cave, and if you're watching this channel and have not subscribed down below or ring that bell, you better do it now. I know you want to. Come on, just click it. And remember, stay off those tracks.